That intro right there is pretty much what defined me as a person. I know recently everybody is a little sick of remakes coming out every now and then. I mean, Pokemon is kind of no exception to that. We have had Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes with Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Generation 1 got 2 remakes with FireRed and LeafGreen and the Let's Go series, which, by the way, I love that series. I know it probably wasn't everybody's favorite because a lot of things were missing from it, but I can appreciate the Let's Go series being existing. But remakes is not the topic of today's video. The topic of today's video is just pretty much me rambling about why I love FireRed and LeafGreen. The reason I wanted to talk about these games is because FireRed and LeafGreen were my first Pokemon games, and that's what got me into the series in general. And then Nintendo went ahead and re-released these games for the Switch. Now, before someone points it out, I'm aware that emulation exists. I mean, I'm not here to debate the here or there on why they decided to release a decade-old game for 20 bucks when on the 3DS it was much cheaper way back when, and of course you can even just play these games for free nowadays. But I'm honestly not even gonna front here because I own most of these Pokemon games physically anyway, and they cost way more than 20 bucks to get an authentic cartridge. But see, that's a topic for another day and for someone else. I am just here to gas up my favorite games. Big reason I wanted to shed some light on these games in particular is because I actually recently learned that not a lot of people played FireRed and LeafGreen. Usually anyone who gets in the Pokemon series always starts with Red or Blue, or they might have gotten into the Generation 3 games, but usually that's like Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. But somehow FireRed and LeafGreen are the games that most people seem to have skipped over. And again, I can kind of understand it. I mean, they just took the Generation 1 games and just made them for the Generation 3 style. Of course, people wanted to experience something new, and back then, these games weren't really anything new. They were just kind of like a new coat of paint. Now, the games aren't that different overall. Gameplay wise, everything is still there. There are a couple of new things such as the Sevi Islands, which is, you know, post-game story content, and Generation 3 mechanics being slotted into it. But the biggest thing that kind of surprised me about it was just that a lot of people didn't know that when you come back to your save that there is almost a little adventure recap every time you come back. It was pretty amazing because it did capture every single thing you have done on your last save. It would capture trainers you battled, Pokemon you caught, maybe you won a badge recently, or maybe you just got out of a certain dungeon. It would capture literally everything. And I thought that was such a cool mechanic back then that I feel like a lot of people did not talk about. I also wanted to highlight that the game had a help system. The help system was pretty much almost an in-game manual that you could use to pretty much figure out anything that you were either confused on. It was actually a really good system that, of course, in today's age, not many people would use because we have access to the internet. But back then, if this was your first Pokemon game and you had no clue how to battle or what type advantages you had to go up against, this thing was pretty useful. All you had to do was press the L or R button and a help system would come up, and the menus would basically just change depending on where you were at in the game. It was a very helpful system that a lot of people could use, especially if you were either brand new to the series or just getting back into it. I'm not gonna dig too deep into FireRed and LeafGreen because these games are a decade old and there's not really much I could say that hasn't been said by anyone else. But I also do want to point out that these are the Switch games and they actually did something that I did not think they were going to do. If you are not familiar with how the games did distribution events back then, pretty much there were always these events around the world that you could go to that would pretty much be able to distribute things like Pokemon items and either event items that you could go to. You basically had to take your entire Game Boy to any of these events that were distributing these things, and somebody would basically be able to give you that item. The two items I want to highlight though are the Aurora ticket and the Mystic ticket. The Mystic ticket was pretty much used to get Ho-Ho and Lugia, and the Aurora ticket was used to get the Deoxys event. These were very staple events because back then, these were the only way you could get these legendary Pokemon. Now, to shed a little bit of history on the way these events work, back then there was an event known as the Pokemon Rocks America event. It was pretty much a tour that was basically held during, I believe, the year 2003 from 2005. These events would hold early gameplay previews and their TCG events, but they also used these events to distribute things such as event items and Pokemon. And of course, those two event items in Pokemon were the Aurora ticket and the Mystic ticket. At the time these events were going on, I was only a child, and by the time I was even getting into Pokemon, the Game Boy was on its way out, and the DS and pretty much the big surge of the internet was taking off. So doing things such as like trading with people in real life and going to the distribution events were almost a thing of the past. Nowadays, distribution events are sent via the internet through mystery gifts, so at that point, there was no point in having these places dedicated to distributing these events in Pokemon. Now, if you do want to kind of experience these events a little bit, there are plenty of people online selling distribution cards where you could just inject the actual items into your game themselves. It's not necessarily cheating, more so that somebody was actually able to find the ROM that gave out these distribution items in Pokemon, so you could have them on your actual game cartridges if you wanted it to. Now, the way the Switch versions of these games do it, as soon as you beat the Elite Four, the Mystic ticket and the Aurora ticket just appears in your bag. So there's no distribution, no nothing. It's like, hey, you beat the Elite Four, all right, go ahead and just go get the Pokemon that you want. Now, as much as I'm giving them praise for literally doing the bare minimum, they couldn't even go as far as to change up the altering cave that still exists in the game's code. The altering cave was supposed to be a place that would pretty much have different types of Pokemon in there, mainly a lot of the Gen 2 mons that you could get access to, and every so often, depending on the day or whenever the event was distributed, you could find different types of Pokemon in that cave. Unfortunately, the only Pokemon that will exist forever in this game is a Zubat, so yeah, I guess they kind of like gave us this, but they could have did something with the altering cave. Now, to close my thoughts, there is a lot more I could say about FireRed and LeafGreen, but again, a bajillion videos have been made on these games already. There's not really much I could say that hasn't been said already. I kind of just want to highlight some very important things about this game that I think are very special, and it started my Pokemon journey. Most people got into Pokemon with Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, or maybe even the Gen 1 titles, and hell, some even got into the Pokemon games with titles that are even newer than the ones I'm listing. But I wanted to highlight specifically FireRed and LeafGreen because they were my favorite and still are my favorite. I always come back to these games all the time because I guess you could say I'm a Gen 1er, but I also just really love FireRed and LeafGreen. Now, I know I'm sounding like a Gen 1er, but I would honestly never go back and play these games. Mechanically, they're awful, they're on the Game Boy for Christ's sakes, and these sprites are horrendous. I mean, look at Golbat. I mean, to me, FireRed and LeafGreen is just an underrated gem. It does suck that a lot of the online features in the game you can only do with someone locally, but I'm gonna assume that they did that because they wanted people to kind of experience what it was like trading and battling and doing all sorts of stuff as it was back then. You know, back before online and the internet was a huge boom. I mean, hell, I can now just trade someone a Pokemon and I don't even gotta be right next to them. It's not to say that it's a good or bad thing, it's just kind of unfortunate. They went the extra mile in putting the events, but not anything else. So I guess it's kind of like it's sure worth the $20 if you've never experienced the games before, but if you either want to have a more accessible place to play these games and or never play these games in general, then I think the $20 isn't gonna kill you. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, that's kind of all the thoughts I got, so I hope you enjoyed my rambling. See ya.